to Just So You Know. I am your host, Marissa V. Grayson, and today's question of the day is, how does the divorce process work? So how the divorce process works is definitely going to depend on the circumstances of each case. In general, it's going to depend on whether your divorce is contested or uncontested. An uncontested divorce is a divorce where the parties are basically able to reach an agreement on all of the issues of their case, whether it be property division, child support, spousal support, child custody and visitation, allocation of debts, things like that. If the parties are unable to reach an agreement on one of these issues, then at that point the divorce becomes a contested divorce. If the divorce is contested, then the case will take a little bit longer, or maybe even a lot longer, than an uncontested divorce. So in general, a divorce case takes a minimum of 6 months before it can become finalized in the state of California. So what are the stages of a divorce? Explaining the divorce process, I like to break it down into 7 phases. Phase 1 of the divorce is considered the initial filing and service of the divorce papers. So when the parties decide that they're going to separate, or that they are leaving their spouse and that they're ready to file a divorce, they have to go to the court and file a petition for dissolution of marriage. At that point, once the petition has been filed, the party has a certain number of days in which they have to have their spouse served with the petition to end their marriage. The second stage of divorce is the response phase, and this is when the other spouse who did not file for divorce has officially been served with the paperwork for the divorce, and they have a certain number of days in which they have to respond and basically explain to the court whether they agree with what the other spouse is asking for in the divorce, whether they do agree on the date of separation, and whatever else is listed in the divorce. Stage 3 is considered the case management stage of divorce, and at this point is when the court will usually call the parties in to speak with the judge and explain to the judge what the issues in their case are, what they expect to happen in their case, whether they plan to conduct discovery, which we'll talk about in a moment, whether they think they're going to need to go to trial, whether they think that they're going to need a trial for 3 days or 2 days, how long their trial is going to take, things of that nature. So the judge will basically get a more broad perspective of the circumstances surrounding the case. Stage 4 of the divorce is what I like to call the disclosure and discovery phase. So when you're ending your marriage, you have the obligation to inform your spouse of all of the property of your marriage, all of the debts, and any other responsibilities in the marriage. So there are certain disclosure forms that have to be filled out by each party, which discloses their income, any credit cards, any bank accounts, any homes that are owned, pensions, life insurance, anything that can bring money into the situation or requires money to be paid out of the situation. All of that has to be disclosed to your spouse. So this is known as the disclosure phase. In some cases, you'll have an instance where one spouse believes that the other spouse is not disclosing all of the information that is true as far as their assets and debts. So, for example, you may have one spouse who owns a business. The spouse who is getting a divorce from the spouse with the business may believe that the income reported from the business is not accurate. Maybe that spouse actually makes 3 times as much as they're claiming on their disclosure forms. So at that point is when the spouse who has some kind of doubt about what's going on and whether the other party is disclosing everything will then proceed with the discovery phase of the divorce. And at this point, the spouse can issue subpoenas, they can take depositions, they can request documents, they can request answers to questions, and pretty much obtain whatever information it is that they're seeking so that they can find out if their disclosures were actually true or if there is actually more to the story. Now, not all divorces are going to need this phase, only in situations where the parties are questioning what the assets and the debts actually are compared to what has been disclosed by the spouse. Phase 5 is what I like to refer to as the settlement phase of the divorce. Now, not all divorces are going to end in settlement. We all know that. But there is at some point where settlement is going to at least be discussed. So during this phase, you will have the parties' attorneys, if they're represented, conferring back and forth. You may have a four-way meeting where both parties and their attorneys will sit down and have a discussion to see if it's possible to reach an agreement on the issues related to their marriage and their divorce. Or you may even have what's known as a settlement conference, where the judge will basically order the parties to come before a neutral attorney who will assist them in trying to reach a settlement. There's also another type of conference called a trial setting conference, which is basically a conference where you go before the judge at the point that you have determined that is going to be necessary to go to trial. At this trial setting conference, you'll basically explain to the judge how long you think the trial is going to take, pick a trial date, how many witnesses you plan to bring, what types of evidence you may plan to bring, things of that nature. You may disclose that to the judge so that your trial. The final phase of divorce is the judgment phase. Whether your divorce be finally dissolved by settlement and agreement, or whether you actually take your case to trial, at some point you will have to have a final judgment entered in your case. So if you reach an agreement with your spouse regarding the terms of your divorce, then you will basically have a settlement agreement drafted up and filed and attached to a judgment, which will then become the final order of the court. If you take your case to trial, the judge will make the final orders and the final decisions related to what's going to happen in your divorce. And then at that point, those orders will become part of your final judgment and an order of the court. So that concludes today's episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.